This is the Truth Network.
Hidden treasures of the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. I hate I missed yesterday's podcast. I was prepared to do that, but I got a call at 6 in the morning. A good friend of mine, actually, my best friend for years and years' wife, lost her son yesterday morning, and they were in Lillington, North Carolina. So I got that horrible call you don't want to get at 6 o'clock in the morning, that her son had died. And so Tammy and I drove to Lillington yesterday, and that has a lot to do with what we're going to teach about today. I guess God had that for me in understanding this verse even more than I had when I was thinking about it. So today's verse is the Gimel verse of the 7th chapter. If you're doing it in the translation of the King James Bible, it's the 3rd verse of the 7th chapter. And there's so much here, it's just spectacular that as we've been talking about, the belly, the place of birth, of new birth, right? And then you've got this whole belly full of wheat, all this fruit that has happened. And so now that you've made all these new births, you now got to feed them. And so that's how we get to where we're at today. So we went from the idea of evangelism now to discipleship. And thy two breasts are like two young roes that are twins, is the verse that we're going to talk about. And, you know, you can't help but note that word two is in there so many different ways. Thy two breasts are two young roes that are twins. So there's three ideas of the number two there. And when you think about the number two biblically, there's all sorts of references to the idea of other. And when you even think about the number two, it has to do with other. And in so many ways that the idea of twins has everything to do with other. And you may know that the Jews teach that Cain and Abel were twins, and certainly Jacob and Esau were twins. And even, when the scarlet cord happened, that had to do with twins, and that idea of scarlet and the idea of red has to do with the sacrifice of birth. And so birth leads to this fruit that we're talking about, and now these twins need food, so to speak. Well, interestingly, the twins, and you just think about how much otherness is in the Bible, and the idea that hopefully, Abel was thinking about Cain more than Cain was thinking about Abel. In other words, that you consider the other more than you consider yourself, which was the exact opposite of what happened with Cain. But as far as the church is concerned, being more concerned with others than concerned with ourselves is this unbelievable idea. And so when you think about the different twos that there possibly are, right, there's hunger and thirst, right? They're sort of twins. And this idea of twins, and since the letter starts with since the word twins in Hebrew starts with the letter tav, which is like God's stamp on something, which interestingly usually has two sides to it. Because you think about it, you got grace and truth. And so you have these two breasts, and think about the church having both grace and truth. But there's all sorts of hunger and thirst. And then there's the bread and the cup. And there's right brain and left brain. But we also think about couples. It's fascinating to me that, I don't know if you're like me, but my wife is one of those people that goes to bed late. In fact, it's not terribly unusual that she would come to bed at 2 or 3 and I'll get up at 4. And so there's just like a short period of time that the dog doesn't have any company. As a matter of fact, this morning, she had just finished the bread she was making. When she came to bed, I got up to put it in the oven. I mean, it's kind of how that works, thanks to Tammy, we're never too early to anything. And thanks to me, we're never too late to something, I don't know how that works in your life, but it takes two to do this. And so I think there's an unbelievable imagery here in the idea of right and left. And I don't know if you ever rowed a boat, but in order for that boat to go straight, if you're rowing it and you're the person at the oars, right, there has to be an equal amount of pressure and at the exact, depth with the oar on the right and the left for the boat to go straight. And it's quite a study in balance, right? And there's no doubt that there is a balance there to so many things in the Christian walk. And in order to stay straight down the middle, right? It requires balance. And so God put others in our life because he knew, right, that we were not equipped to get us going straight. We needed some other pressure on us. And so that's the beauty of so many of us in our marriages, that God has provided this unbelievable dualism in order to make it happen. The interesting thing, again, when you think about the idea of these breasts, is they are going to provide the milk. And the milk is going to be what is going to grow all those heaps of wheat, right, that we talked about in the previous verse. And so, I don't know if the opportunity presents itself to you to get that call at 6 a.m. sometimes that somebody that is dear to you and close to you lost that loved one. But at that point in time, right, you are at a point where literally heaven is touching earth. And you know that proverb that it says it's better to be in a house of mourning than a house of feasting. And there's no doubt, as I was there yesterday with my friend's wife and her other son, who was missing his brother, who certainly had all sorts of concerns that he hadn't been the brother that maybe he could have been. There was a son there that was thinking he should have been closer to his father. In other words, there was this point where everybody really reflects on life and they count their days in a different way. And they see the value of family and how invaluable money is at this point. Now, there was somebody sitting there yesterday in the hospital as they were mourning of the loss of this life and thinking about, I wish, that Greg had made more money. I mean, that wasn't anything that anybody thought. I mean, what they all thought was, we just didn't get enough of Greg. We didn't get to experience him enough. And there's this sense of heaven touching earth and the absolute honor that God gives you sometimes to be salt and light in a situation, right? That I had, the man that had passed away's girlfriend was there, and I'd only actually met her at Greg's father's funeral, which I actually preached about 8 years ago. And so Tammy and I and Greg's uncle were there praying actually in the waiting room while the others were in there with the body. And unbeknownst to us, Mary had come out, Mary being the girlfriend of the man that had passed away. And I'd only ever seen her 8 years ago. And so, interestingly, as we were praying, I prayed for Mary. And so we brought our heads up. She said, "Thank you for praying for me." And my wife actually was a little offended, like, why is this person we don't know from Adam saying that we prayed for her? And I was like, Tammy, that's Mary. That's she actually drove him to the hospital trying to get his life saved. And she was, had been through quite a trauma. And so I went over there and prayed with her, which was just a huge honor. And I could see that God was, healing, not healing. He was comforting her in what probably was the lowest moment of her life. I don't know, but it had to be rank amongst them. And she said, I'll never forget your message at Vic's funeral, meaning my friend that it was his widow that had called me. She said, what you spoke really touched my heart. In other words, God had touched her heart. And then interestingly, God had provided me there in Lillington, in spite of the fact that's quite a ways from where I live, that day to help, comfort her. Hopefully he touched her heart and comforted her. And I got to be there from my standpoint, like, wow, how cool that I got to be there to help nourish, one of God's children. However that worked, God gave me that honor. But I also have to tell you that Sunday, as we were listening to testimony after testimony of another lady who went to be the Lord on Sunday by the name of Doris, who's at the church there, and person after person talked about what she had done to nourish their lives, right? And this idea of the beauty of these breasts is unbelievable, right? Because the idea that these two are two is pretty much what it says, but they're twins, meaning that they have all sorts of otherness about them, but by the same token, they're doing the same thing, but then they are young roes, okay? And that idea of roes these are unbelievably beautiful, light-bringing breasts, for lack of a better word. That's exactly what they are, because they're absolutely stunningly beautiful. And so when the world looks across, and what they see from the church is people that love well, they see hospitals, they see colleges, they see, when there's some kind of disaster, who shows up again? It is the church. And as we are being the hands and feet, like I sat in that service on Sunday, and for an hour people testified about how this woman had been there with a chocolate pie or whatever it was. Again, from them, that was an absolutely beautiful moment in their life where they touched heaven and earth. And most of the time when you heard them talking about, they had lost a family member or something had happened where they were at that juncture where heaven touches earth. And it's a holy place. It really, really is, where God touches people, to get our attention that, man, there's a connection between heaven and earth. It's not just meaningless days. And so what a cool, beautiful thing that we get to be in the church, to provide nourishment, especially in those moments. So I hope God provides some moments for you. That sounds kind of weird, but I guess, that however it works, God knows it, and He knows perfectly how to use the gifts that you have to be these unbelievable light-giving breaths. Thank you for listening.